we're recording right now. So, Paul Brody, thank you for making time to sit down and talk with me. We're going to go over questions that were asked on Reddit, on the Eath Raider and the Ethereum subreddits. But the questions were quite technical, and we'll just dive straight into it. But before that, I just want to get a quick introduction on whoever doesn't know who you are and what you've been building here at EY. So can you give us a quick overview? Who's Paul Brody? Where are you from? How did you end up working for EY? And tell us something about yourself in general.
Okay, well, I'm Paul Brody. I'm the global blockchain leader at EY. I think of this in some ways as my fifth software startup. I have been here for 4.5 years. I came over from IBM, but my career has been mostly going back and forth between big companies like McKinsey and startups like i2 Technologies and others. So when I was at IBM, I actually got interested in blockchains. In fact, I built IBM's very first blockchain, which was a product called Adept, which stood for Autonomous Decentralized Peer-to-Peer Telemetry. And the idea behind Adept was that managing large device networks is really challenging. And it's somewhat strange that as all these devices get smarter and smarter and smarter, how come we're still spending all this money to build data center infrastructure to manage these devices that are actually super smart, right? Why can't these devices effectively manage each other in a decentralized fashion? And as a part of that research project and the work that we did in cooperation with Samsung, we built out this prototype called Adept, which was a combination of the alpha version of Ethereum with BitTorrent and a communications protocol called Telehash. And that was a huge amount of fun. I really loved it. At the time, it's hard to believe now because IBM is so enthusiastic about blockchain, but at the time, IBM wasn't so excited about it. And interestingly, EY actually had clients who were interested not only in IoT, but also in blockchain. And
so this is 4.5 years ago?
About 5 years ago. And serendipity was perfect. And so I came over here, and after a few months at EY, I think mostly just to get me to stop bothering them, the leadership team allowed me to set up a proper integrated blockchain business.
So you're American? You're based out of... Are you American?
I'm not actually. Well, I am. I have a U.S. passport, but I'm sure you can tell by the accent. I am originally from England. Mm-hmm. My parents are both English. My parents actually met at university in England. They moved to America. They loved it. They moved back to Europe, and after a few years, my brother and I were born, and my mother said, I really want to go back to America. So I mostly grew up in America.
Yeah, and so you're based out of San Francisco. Is that where you got your education as well, or did you get it in Europe or in England?
Grew up mostly in Colorado. Went to school in New Jersey, and then I have lived pretty much everywhere. I'd say my on-the-job education started in Nigeria, which was my first job. I worked for the first mobile network operator there.
This is back in the 90s, I guess.
It's in the 90s. This was, I feel old. We ran an analog e-tax network, but it was really exciting. It was, I was studying Africa. I was studying African history, and I thought, I should get a job in Africa. And I've always had a love of technology, so ended up somehow at the first mobile network operator in Nigeria for a year. Then I went to join McKinsey, first to LA and then to South Korea. I said I wanted to do more technology work, so I ended up in South Korea with McKinsey. And then did a whole string of startups, which took me to various parts of the world. And then IBM, which took me so much around the world. People used to say that IBM stands for I've been moved.
Yeah, you mentioned before we started recording, because that's actually when I said we should actually be recording that you travel around quite a bit. I assumed that you were based out of San Francisco, and that's where you would spend most of your time, but that's not what your life looks like, and that's not what EY and the blockchain department or division looks like either, right? You have many different spots all over the world where you're developing this thing, and that's what your life looks like as well.
That's right. Well, the challenge when you come to work at a partnership like EY is we are a partnership, right? We're a partner-owned firm, and the partners are all over the world. And so they are the investors. I think of the other partners in EY as my investors in the startup, but I also think about them as my channel to market, right? The partners are the people who have those strategic relationships with clients, whether they're in audit or tax or business strategy. And so what we have tried to do is build a globally integrated blockchain software business, but one that is very distributed around the world, where each part of the world is going to build up over time its own special competency. And they're going to build those capabilities in their home country as well as export them globally.
So let's just go over the question. Let's just dive in. We've gotten about 60 or 65 questions. We'll try and get through as many as possible. But you mentioned that whatever question wasn't answered, you or your team or anyone, depending on the question, you will go over them and actually provide an answer to the person who asked that question.
Yes, we will try to answer most of the other questions, except the ones that my mother posted.
Well, I said that we're not recording this in video because I could have made an HD joke. It's actually funny how meteoric your rise in the Eath rate or the Ethereum community was. I guess that happened after the CoinDesk article back in April, I guess, when they talked about, or they wrote an article about what EY was building. And so let's just dive in with user rhetorical's question, which is, what first resonated with you about Ethereum and or blockchain, and have you personally interacted with Ethereum projects?
I mean, as I mentioned before, right, the very first project I did at IBM was using the alpha version of Ethereum. Right, we used to get these calls from lab security, like, who is this guy that you let in that's smoking? Does he not know that smoking is not allowed in the lab? And that was Vitalik. We sat down and we thought, okay, when we were thinking at IBM about what makes for a good distributed computing environment, we had a lengthy discussion because blockchain is not the first distributed computing architecture out there. And one of the things that we realized very quickly was that although blockchain is not the first distributed computing environment, it's the only one it's got a couple of important features. Number one, it's genuinely decentralized. And number two, it allows for payments. And in the context of IoT or anything else, if we are going to create value, make things more efficient, payments are going to be a part of that process. And in particular, at the time, the choices were Bitcoin or Ethereum. And the approach that Ethereum had, which was this kind of fully programmable virtual machine environment, was very attractive. We really wanted to build a distributed computing architecture to take advantage of all the distributed computing brain power that's out there. So I've been quite a big fan of Ethereum since the very beginning, but I don't think that our enthusiasm at EY is sentimental in that respect. And in fact, I really try to avoid getting sucked into big debates about which one is better. Right.
We have some questions on that as well later on.
So, and when we get to those questions, I'll be happy to answer it. But the answer is, I personally have been working on Ethereum for some time. All the business applications that we develop in-house at EY are based on Ethereum or private versions of Ethereum.
So that is a perfect segue into some questions on EY, specifically building on Ethereum and you leading this team here. So Rhetorical also asked, why did you and EY land on Ethereum as a project to build on? But that was probably because it gave you the most versatility when you started building back in 2014, 15?
So back in 2015, it was really just Bitcoin or Ethereum, so we went with Ethereum. When I came to EY, we had a couple of interesting factors. Number one, I didn't have a $5 billion R&D budget like IBM does. So, the prospect of actually creating a blockchain was definitely not going to be on the table. Number two, the challenge that we also have is, if you're going to build application software, it really needs to be on the most widely used platform, because you can't build a great software company if you're trying to build the same application on 10 different platforms. So we had to make a choice. I felt like if we were going to do a really good job, we could only make one choice. And very importantly, I think very early on, we realized, and I strongly believe, that the only way blockchain ever kind of delivers on the vision we have is if we use one global public blockchain. If you're using a private blockchain, then you are limiting your scalability, right? You're not from a technical perspective, but from a organizational perspective, right? And so the beauty of Ethereum is it's the most popular public blockchain. It's the most popular private blockchain. And so with a single skill set and a single set of applications, we can serve clients in both public and private blockchains, and we can help them be ready for what we hope will be an eventual migration of all kind of enterprise work over to public blockchains.
But when you started building on Ethereum, well, so today you could claim that it's the most popular and most versatile blockchain for EY's purpose, but that probably wasn't true 4 years ago, or at least that it was harder to actually make that statement. My question is that did your conviction on using Ethereum actually became bigger over the last 4 years, or do you look at those competitors and well, because I'm actually asking questions that will come up later, but is the conviction in Ethereum as a public open blockchain for EY's purpose growing, or do you look at other blockchains and do you often wonder or think like maybe they can give us a better base layer, so to say, to build our products?
So we're always looking at other solutions, but I try to really avoid this conversation of which one is better, right? I think if anything, I'm a huge history fan. I love reading history. I love history of technology. I love history of standards wars. I want to highly recommend. There's one of my favorite blogs it's called Monday Note, and the author is a guy named Jean-Louis Gasset, he's now in his 70s. He was the head of research at Apple. He worked for Steve Jobs. He's very proud of saying he's been fired, I think maybe more than once by Steve Jobs. He's a brilliant guy. He's got incredible perspective on history, and he writes lots of historical stuff about technology standards wars. I think over and over again, whether it's Windows or Betamax or iOS and Android, the best technology never wins. There was always somebody with a much better solution that was offering something about the same time. So I avoid this question of which one is better or what could be a better base layer. We're always looking at other stuff, but if it doesn't have developer acceptance, no matter how cool it is, it's not going to get traction.
User Lilpath asks, in convincing your clients to use a public blockchain, what has been the most common and effective aha moment that your team has given them? Also, and I am paraphrasing, if blockchain is to revolutionize accounting among other sectors, does EY see their dedicated jump into blockchain as a way to potentially leapfrog the rest of the big four, in terms of revenue at least? So, leapfrogging other competitors, and what's the most common aha moment that your clients go through?
The most important aha moment, and to be honest, we don't have a huge number of them. The vast majority of our enterprise users today are still building on private blockchains. But I would say 2 or 3 years ago, if you had talked about private blockchains and explained why you think they have some shortcomings, a lot of CIOs would just say, nope, not going to happen. Never going to do it. But more and more, what resonates when I talk to CIOs is about the evolution from private or hybrid clouds to public cloud. If you were to go back 12 or 13 years ago, most CIOs said, we can't use public cloud. We just can't, right? We're not confident in the security or the privacy of shared infrastructure, even though we see the financial benefits. And private cloud was very successful early on with large enterprise clients. But today, it's public cloud that absolutely dominates the business. And so it's very similar for blockchain. Today, private blockchain is dominant in the enterprise because enterprise CIOs are fundamentally very, very conservative, right? You don't want to take chances with a multi-billion-dollar order book, because your IT systems fail. So this makes enterprises very careful about embracing new technology directly into the core of their operations. And this is why, and what happens is we talk about this evolution from private cloud to public cloud, and light goes on. They're like, yes. And so what's interesting is 2 years ago, clients would have said, no, this is never going to happen. Today, we often hear, yeah, actually, I can see this happening. I don't think we're ready, but it's going to happen. I will share with you, I think, one of my favorite stories from early on in my time at EY. We had a really cool project for a really big US company. And we finished up the pilot, the proof of concept. It was for a enterprise system to deal with a bunch of partners. And they said, this is amazing. We love this. We think it could save us literally over $100 million a year. and we're listening to this conversation. We're on the phone with a client. We're talking things through. I am writing the press release in my head, right? I'm already thinking about like, so how much are we going to charge them? And I almost missed the part where the client says, we really love the work you did, but we're not going forward. And I was like, wait a minute, seriously? You're not going forward? Kind of unpack that for me. And when we were done sort of unpacking that non sequitur, it seems great, but we're not moving forward. The answer was blockchains are too new and we are nervous about plunging into this. We just don't want to be first. So now we have clients saying, I can see us getting there, but we don't want to be first. And the hunt is on. I think we've actually, we may have almost licked this. The hunt is on for a few really intrepid technology or really companies where you have a chief procurement officer, a chief supply chain officer who's willing to take the plunge and go directly to secure transactions on public blockchains with zero knowledge proofs.
What do your competitors think about that? Is it a way to leap? Is EY's focus on blockchain with you spearheading it? Is that a way to leapfrog the other big four or the three of the other big four companies?
My goal is for EY to be the world's leading blockchain software company. I don't mean among the big four. I mean among all software companies. So I am interested in the number one position in this market.
Ethical Trade asks, how did you manage to convince your management to release Nightfall in the public domain?
I am extremely fortunate at EY. Our senior leadership has been amazing. I actually can text our chairman, our global chairman, both the prior one and the current one. I can text them, I can email them, I get replies. And the replies are not, who are you? The replies are, what do you need? How can I help? I try not to abuse that, but we've had incredible support. I think everybody's on board. We had a big discussion specifically about Nightfall, which is, we've developed something that's really awesome. It solves we think a really important problem, which is companies won't use public blockchains without privacy. And we then had a discussion about how do we deploy a new privacy or security and encryption solution. And there were two key factors. Number one, you do not and should not ever build a privacy and security solution based on closed source code, right? You just can't do that. Otherwise, you can't be sure that it will operate reliably. And then, and you can't be sure that there aren't bugs, right? Open source is important. And then secondly, if you want really widespread adoption, you really need to make it a proper kind of open source that's free. And when you look at what's happened with a lot of open source licenses, they're tricky licenses. They come with all kinds of complications. The last thing, even an open source license today in a large enterprise will be extensively reviewed. On the other hand, if you have a public domain license, effectively no license at all, you just say it's free for everybody to use as much as they want, then you have something even better, which is something that requires about 5 seconds of a lawyer's time before they say, yep, you can use this.
Whose initiative was it? Was this something you had in mind when you were building this? Or how did this come to be?
We've known for a very long time at EY that it's absolutely critical that we get everybody on public blockchains and that privacy is essential to public blockchains. So for probably more than 18 months or 2 years, we've been working on privacy solutions. Once we did that, the next step was once we figured out that we wanted to go with zero knowledge proofs, the next step was to build a prototype. And once we had something that was working, we just thought about how quickly can we drive adoption.
Mm-hmm. King Leo 23 and Steve AM1 ask about the EY DiePack. Is that how I pronounce it?
DiePack, yes.
DiePack. And from your LinkedIn, I quote, EY DiePack uses zero-knowledge proof software to identify stolen tokens, prevent their usage, and issue replacement tokens to the victims of thefts, analogous to those exploding DiePacks we all see in movies about bank robberies, unquote. How does this work? Any technical paper to be pointed to?
So DiePack was an outgrowth of the work we did preparing for Nightfall, but DiePack wasn't ready for launch at the same time as Nightfall. So We have DiePack working in the lab for non-fungible tokens, and we are working on a solution for fungible tokens that requires a little bit more tweaking and fine-tuning, but I'm hoping we will have a release of DiePack fairly soon to share with people, and an associated white paper with that. But it's kind of uses some of the same underlying technology.
Someone asked you, just following up, I can't find a question on a quick glance, but somebody asked about the current status of the Nightfall release is still under security reviews, and somebody asked something along the lines of when will it be fully either formally verified or when will it be production ready for other people to use? Is that still something that's being worked on right now, like the disclosure?
Yeah, so we still have people working on Nightfall, right? I would say it's ready for use now, right? But we continue to work on it and improve it. I would say that the difference between where we were when we launched it and where we are now is just people have had a chance to test it out, to use it. We were expecting to get maybe more bug reports than we did. But so far we haven't gotten a lot. We've closed them out. We've been testing it out. So I would characterize it as, like a lot of software, there's no guarantees with public domain open source software, but it seems like people are not uncovering a lot of additional errors. So we feel pretty comfortable in using it. We're certainly baking it into all of our product, and we'll be we're basically reconstructing all of our business applications to use zero knowledge proofs, whether they're in public or private blockchains.
Mm-hmm. DBO, I'm just reading the usernames even though they're funny. DBO Vilataki, I hope I pronounced it right, asks, given EY's interest in developing on the public Ethereum network, how does EY hedge against stalled development like scaling, regulatory risk, and so-called competing networks? I'm curious how large an organization such as EY plans for developing business lines in the future on the back of an as of yet unactualized technology. And Sleepy Ninja had a similar question.
So we're always looking to see if there are other solutions that might eventually become more popular with the developers. I think really good developers and really good thinking about how to build decentralized applications isn't necessarily Ethereum dependent. If we had to migrate from Ethereum to something else, I feel pretty confident that we would be able to do so. I think the big challenge is when you're building a decentralized application is really thinking in a properly decentralized way, right? Just because you can take the piece of code and run it in Solidity doesn't mean that you should architect it in the same way. Similarly, if you're running a business process, we try to think about not just how would I take that process that exists in Java and put it into Solidity, but instead, how would I think about how a company should execute this process using a decentralized model with a combination of tokens and smart contracts? So the hard work, the big things that people need to shift their head around are not Ethereum platform specific. They are how do you build a properly decentralized application? It is possible that Ethereum could face significant regulatory hurdles. One of the things that we want to avoid is getting overly focused or dependent specifically on cryptocurrencies, for example, because there are different regulators who are some regulators are very, very opposed to those. I believe the big value proposition around Ethereum is for enterprises to coordinate their business processes with each other over decentralized infrastructure that doesn't require, other than for a little bit of gas, any meaningful amounts of cryptocurrency. I also believe that enterprises will largely prefer to buy and sell and transact with each other using fiat currency tokens, not in the sense of fiat currency good or bad compared to cryptocurrency, but because if my revenues are in dollars and my costs are in dollars, then I want to avoid a situation where I take a big chunk of my money, convert it to a foreign currency. It could be Ether, it could be Bitcoin, it could be Swiss francs, it doesn't matter. Because every time I do that, I pay transaction fees, and I also am I'm embracing some level of foreign exchange risk. So by the time, in the time between when my revenue came in and my costs go out, I might have to, there might be a substantial shift. If I keep all of my revenue and expenses and intermediate expenses in the same currency, whether it's dollars or euros or yen, then I have minimal risk. And if you'll see a theme from me in this discussion, I mean, we ultimately serve large enterprises, and large enterprises are very, very thoughtful about how they manage risk, and they really try to avoid embracing unnecessary risk.
User Fatfire Throwaway asks, how many partnerships and/or clients does EY have that develop on the Ethereum blockchain, and how much growth does this number have?
So actually, again, we're probably, you'll get another theme from us, which is that we are very different from some of our competitors who seem to have dozens and dozens of different partnerships with all kinds of companies. That looks great on paper. I can tell you in practice, it's really hard. If you have 10, 20, 30 partnerships, it's really, really hard to do those well. It's really hard to bring those people to market. So we are actually extremely selective. We have two major partnerships in the world of blockchain for EY. Number one, Microsoft. They're our biggest client. They're our most important partner, right? The work that we have done together with Microsoft, especially around the Xbox video game platform, has been really groundbreaking.
Is that where you sell the license, the Xbox licenses?
That's right. This is where we're managing Xbox video game licenses, the licensing transactions for Microsoft on a blockchain. And
on using the Nightfall protocols, or
no, it's using a Quorum enterprise blockchain, because this partnership with Microsoft predates Nightfall. So it was built on Quorum, and it's a private blockchain from Microsoft and their key business partners. And we've done a huge amount of work with Microsoft looking at how you scale this, because if you look at the Xbox ecosystem, it's huge. There are over 3,000 companies publishing games in the Xbox ecosystem. Microsoft is doing, I think, in the millions of transactions per day. This is a really good real-world test of how you scale blockchain. And so the partnership that we've built is that EY has built a lot of the process logic. We built the smart contracts. We built the Quorum application. Microsoft's been really helping us tune up and optimize how you stand up a large number of partners in a Quorum ecosystem, how you spin up multiple blockchain nodes, how you enable, things like integration to Active Directory, so it's easy to bring partners on a private blockchain. So the partnership with Microsoft has been amazing. That's our probably our most important partnership. Our other tremendously strategic partnership is with SAP. We are very enterprise focused. All enterprise business transactions originate and terminate in an ERP system. Right. And so getting that super easy and well done inside of SAP is very important. If you think about representing an asset or a product or a business relationship, right, every piece of inventory can be a digital token. Every business relationship can be a contract or really a set of contracts, right? Those have to execute well and reliably in SAP. And if we do it right, our SAP users won't even know that they're connected to a blockchain. They'll just know that suddenly they have visibility to inventory out at their channel partners, or they can get invoices and payments executed almost instantaneously. But they'll be doing it from inside their existing ERP application.
Ethical Trade asks, what proportion of EY's clients is willing to start using blockchain because it's actually useful to them, as opposed to using for marketing or for purposes for which a standard database would have done the job?
That's a good question. I mean, we have established, and we did push really hard not to do too much, let's call it innovation theater, because you can waste a lot of time building projects for clients that don't really have any intention of implementing. And that's a waste of my time. It's a waste of your time. Yes, you get the press release, and I do too, but in the end, it doesn't really go anywhere. And by the way, that $30,000, $50,000 little project doesn't really help us build up our skills either. So we have actually tried to avoid that. It's hard to say what percentage of EY clients overall, right? We try to zero in on the clients that we hope will be serious about it, and we try to turn away blockchain applications that we think could be much more easily and efficiently done with a centralized database. Fundamentally, I believe private blockchains should just be a place you get comfortable with blockchains before you go on to public. And if we have clients who are really adamant that no way are they ever going to go onto a public blockchain, then we have to think really carefully about the use case and whether or not there's ever going to be, a long-term implementation. There are cases, by the way, where that can be true, but we have to be careful and selective because I don't want to just build a very expensive version of Dropbox.
Yeah, you're not building the long blockchain IST corporation, something like that.
Exactly.
Do you still think, as a follow-up question, do you still think that that is a problem, or is the infrastructure getting mature enough that companies and enterprise are actually on board with this, or do you think we're still somewhat in the innovation theater stage?
There's definitely still some innovation theater going on, but I think for the most part, the people who are doing projects now are a little bit more sophisticated in their approach. The responses are more positive. That being said, I still feel a little disappointed with where we are on public blockchains. I feel like, there's a lot of financial services infrastructure, but there's not as much useful stuff to finance, right? And again, sort of going back to the history example, stock markets were created to finance large companies, joint stock companies like the Dutch East India Company. I feel like in blockchain, we have lots of financial services, but we don't have any companies that are building stuff, right? You can borrow money on margin, for example, but only really to buy other cryptocurrencies or other crypto assets, right? And I'm very enthusiastic about seeing more and more tokens where the investment you're making is to build a service, to own an asset that exists in the real world, and things like that.
So I guess, as I'm searching for the next question, I guess the new token standards must interest you more, say, than... Let me get it straight. So the new ERC, I think it's 1155 token standard, combines the ERC20 and ERC 7021 functionality. So I guess things like that are more exciting or more interesting to you and your team because they actually allow for use cases, and they as you said, it's nice that you can go on margin, short or long, whatever cryptocurrency, but there's much more to this wave of innovation. So I guess that's more exciting for you and your team.
Right. I get very excited about that. I mean, we have a lot of clients who are working in cryptocurrency. We have especially the whole audit side of the business because there's a lot of transactions there. But what gets me personally very excited is figuring out how we run complex multi-party business processes with shared logic. That, I believe, is a killer application for blockchain in the enterprise, right? It's a combination of the kind of orchestration of process that you get with a Web 2.0 infrastructure, right? If this, then that, we can have shared logic about what happens when things go wrong or occur in the supply chain. And we can have multiple partners. If you look at how companies transact with each other today, it's either emailing spreadsheets back and forth, sending EDI messages. EDI is like business text messaging, right? I can't put any business logic in it. It's only from me to you. I can't even do basically EDI group messaging, right? With blockchain, I can have shared business logic. We can have payments. We can have multiple people kind of sharing information. I think the value proposition of blockchain for enterprise users is tremendous. And I just want to see us get to the point where that infrastructure is usable and scalable.
User Mountain Miner asks, what are some real-world examples? So tuning into this, what are some real-world examples of intercompany contracts, accounts payable, inventory, and other supply chain problems that Ethereum could play a critical role in solving, or public blockchains in general? Yeah.
So the ones that I'm most excited about, the benchmark that we have is this two kind of key metrics they're looking for. Number one, do you have multiple entities involved in a transaction? And number two, do those entities have shared business logic, right? So for example, we're doing one now with an automaker where as parts represented by individual tokens are put onto new cars, the existing stock of parts at the factory goes down. When it reaches a certain threshold, that triggers a reorder, right? The reorder needs to do two things. Number one, it needs to tell the manufacturer of the parts, please make me some more and get them ready for pickup. And number two, it needs to tell a shipping company to go and get the pickup. That is a perfect example in a very, very small way of multiple parties, right? Car maker, parts maker, trucking company, shared business logic, right? If I fall below a certain component volume threshold inside the factory, then A, go order me another batch, a replenishment batch, and B, schedule a trucking pickup. That's very small. We haven't even gotten to how much do I owe the supplier for this? What does it look like on my volume purchase agreement? If the stuff is coming across borders, do I need to pay tariff, tax, and duty? Once you get that simple triangle, is it like probably the simplest use case? But once you get that working, you can build all kinds of processes around that all of which create tremendous value.
User Eath asks, what type of products and services will EY be rolling out using Nightfall in Q1 of 2020?
Every single product that we have is being re-engineered to run in a way that is completely agnostic about whether it's on a private or a public blockchain, and is able to run with privacy, high standard of privacy enabled by zero knowledge proofs. So sometime by the end of this year or early next year, we will have our first version of OpsChain with zero knowledge proofs built into it. And over the course of next year, we will migrate basically all of our OpsChain product functionality into a model that's basically public or private agnostic. No matter what you do, your data will be protected by a zero knowledge proof. And there'll be other types of encryption and tools in there as well, but that'll be kind of a core part of it. And that will also include private contracts as well.
There was another question on the rough order of magnitude of customers, but we covered that. User Sabit asks two questions. Which industry can profit the most? And again, we might have covered this already, but I'll just read the question. Which industry can profit the most by integrating parts of their business model onto the Ethereum blockchain in terms of increasing their efficiency or enabling new ways to deliver value? And follow up, where do you think we should make a cut on what should be put on a blockchain and what shouldn't be put on a blockchain?
Both great questions. I don't think there'll be many industries in the end that aren't in some way kind of affected by blockchain. I think it's really just a question of within a particular industry, do you have a pioneer? So right now, there's a lot of pioneers in the supply chain space because manufacturing is very globally distributed and extremely complex and relies a lot upon kind of multi-party coordination. So manufacturing, logistics, supply chain management, those I think will be among the first to move forward. There's some others like pharmaceuticals, which have a high value on both extended supply chains and traceability. As we get into the era of personalized medicine, it's not enough that I know where that medicine came from. If the medicine was made for you, it's really important that you take the medicine that was made for you. And so we're working on use cases where individualized drug development and medication is tracked from the taking of the blood sample from the patient to the manufacturing process and all the way back, right? We've already talked about software and entertainment, things like that. In the end, I don't think we've exhausted all of the use cases. I will say, interestingly, that I think that financial services might end up being one of the least affected. And in this respect, again, probably makes me a bit of a contrarian, but I'll explain my reasoning. Blockchains are at their highest value when you want to have coordinated multi-party processes without a centralized intermediary. We don't talk much about why it is that people don't want a centralized intermediary. But the answer isn't just that all intermediaries are bad. The answer is that centralized intermediaries that are not regulated become extremely powerful, right? Car sharing companies are worth more than the car industry, right? Hotel sharing, sort of room sharing companies are worth more than the biggest hotel chains. That's because even though they don't have any physical assets, they are able to accumulate enormous amounts of information because they can see all the supply and demand data. And then they don't just facilitate a connection between a buyer and a seller, they optimize, manage, and monetize that connection. But the consequence of that is if you're a large enterprise, if you're a car maker, the thought that someone who doesn't make cars and didn't do years of R&D might then monetize your relationship with customers is a little bit scary. The very interesting case with financial services is a couple of things. Number one, intermediaries are, for all practical purposes, required by law, right? You have to have ID. It can't just be a self-sovereign ID. It has to be the ID that you were issued by the government, right? Somebody has to check that there are comprehensive KYC and AML regulations, and regulators themselves limit what it is that banks and other central parties can see and do with the information from your accounts. A consequence of that is actually, in some ways, the role of the intermediary in financial services is basically required, and intermediaries, because their power is limited by regulators, are perhaps less scary for participants than others. So we're all used to using banks, right? And large companies, I always make a joke, nobody, the car maker, ever says, well, we can't use that bank because they might trade against us by looking at our accounts. They can't do that. So ironically, the regulation that exists in the financial services industry may mean that blockchain's value proposition isn't as strong there, even though in many ways that's where it originated. So that was a terribly long response. But.
No. User art. I'm just always torn between going deeper into what you just said and just going through with the questions, because if not, people will get angry. User RXG says, you've said before that you believe that fiat currency tokens will be the way that enterprises will want to do transactions. He asks, could you expand on that? By fiat currency tokens, do you mean strictly crypto tokens pegged to the dollar and backed by the dollar by a custodian like USD, like Tether or any of the other ones? Do you think trustless stablecoins pegged to the dollar, which are backed by crypto like DAI from MakerDAO, will be viewed by enterprises as something different or unacceptable in some way?
So I think the jury is out on whether the trustless stablecoins that are backed only by other crypto will hold up quite as well in volatility. We don't know yet, but I think it's actually a really cool idea. I think I go back to the principle that enterprises are very careful about how they manage risk. And so they want to keep their currency, they want to keep their transactions in the same currency. All things being equal, they would probably prefer something that's very easy to understand, like a one-for-one dollar to dollar in the bank to dollar token on the blockchain model, right? Not only that, but if I were an enterprise user, I would want to know who is the auditor of this company that is doing this, and is the auditor not just auditing the financial statements, but actually checking every day or maybe even in real time that if the system says I have $1 billion tokens on the Ethereum blockchain, do they also have the exact same number of actual dollars in accounts? And are those dollars not encumbered by any other loans or obligations or requirements? That would be the gold standard, right? And that's the one that people will find, I think, will get acceptance first. Then I think people will be interested in accepting or thinking about sort of blended things where I have a synthetic stablecoin based on a blend of multiple hard currencies, also backed by money in the bank, right? That's kind of the principle behind Libra. And then I think eventually, with enough track record, people might get comfortable with something with a stablecoin like DAI that is entirely decentralized and entirely cryptocurrency based, but pegged to a fiat currency.
Just wondering, you said the jury is out, but DAI, if I remember correctly, has been running for about 1.5 years now. When would you, if any of your enterprise customers would ask you about, when would you feel comfortable actually referring them to a completely trustless or a completely decentralized stablecoin? And I understand that the USD or the Theorem model is way more interesting for them right now, but I'm just curious to get your thoughts on that, if at all that becomes interesting to them or preferable.
I'd want to see how DAI performs. We need a market crisis of some point, right? A big spike upwards, or more likely a really big spike downwards, that would help us understand how these things perform under pressure. That's very useful. I think in general, the time frame that it takes for enterprises to go from, ooh, this is an interesting idea, to I'm okay doing it, is about 10 years.
That's what you mentioned in your talk as well, right? The 10-year time. Yeah. So So the answer is, let's see in 10 years how DAI.
I'd probably be ready before then, but I think enterprise clients, you need about a 10-year track record for them to get really comfortable.
User Labrav asks, what do you think it would take for an on-chain based stablecoin like DAI to be integrated at an enterprise level? Well, yeah, do you think that will ever happen? Well, let's see in 10 years if they feel comfortable. User Mammoth Groomer 86 asks, Nightfall supports ERC 721 non-fungible tokens. Will the Nightfall software adapt interoperability features as well? What are your thoughts on it in terms of cross-industry adoption of blockchain?
So I think private tokens are essential for cross-industry adoption of blockchain, right? If you think about something like food traceability, if I have a crate of food, a ton of strawberries, right? And I represent that as a single token. I can track that token as it goes through the supply chain, right? I can buy that token, I can sell it, I can finance it, I can ship it, I can do all of those things if it's properly represented as a token, right? Believe it or not, it still blows my mind that there are blockchains out there that don't tokenize stuff, right? But blockchains are kind of made for buying and selling tokens. So if the challenge today is there are food traceability blockchains, and there are logistics blockchains, and there are insurance blockchains, and there are even payments blockchains. And it's completely pointless, I think, to expect somebody to join 4 different blockchains to complete one business transaction. If I properly tokenize stuff, I can do all of those things: logistics, traceability, insurance, payments, everything on the Ethereum blockchain. I just need privacy. Right. So Nightfall, I hope, will lead to enterprise adoption and the ability of people to feel comfortable moving tokens across kind of multi-industry processes. Nightfall will continue to evolve. We made it public domain. We continue to contribute to it, but I also really hope that more people out there will do it. We're so excited with, I'm going to pronounce the name wrong, but ZeroXcert. I forget how to pronounce it, but they have forked it to support their newest extension of the ERC 721. So I'm really appreciative of that, and we hope to see. And I think there's other stuff coming, but we made this public domain so that people would adopt it, and we will do our best to support people when they have questions or want help.
I think they wrote. I can remember reading a Medium post or something on it, and I'll just link to that so people can check it out. What just finishing on the EY topic, what kind of job profiles does Paul expect to emerge at EY based on EY's engagement in the field, and what roles will EY hire for to support the implementation?
So we have spent a lot of time thinking about that, and you will see every ad that's placed by the EY Global Blockchain team for people on our team specifically says you don't need to have experience as a blockchain developer. I believe that our most successful people bring either depth of knowledge around enterprise process or financial services or technology, but it doesn't have to be blockchain. We will invest in people to get them up to speed. I would rather hire a smart person who really wants this and is really thoughtful than somebody who's got 3 different blockchain jobs on their resume.
Some questions on Ethereum as a network. Ethical Trade asks, will the work done on Nightfall become unusable on a new blockchain, the Eath 2.0 blockchain? If only partially, to what extent? And user Chessmate asked, how does EY plan to handle the transition of its clients from Eath 1.0 to Eath 2.0?
So the answer is I don't know exactly yet. I certainly hope it won't become unusable, but if it does, then we will have to adjust it accordingly, right? The underlying rules of zero knowledge proofs I don't think are going to change with Ethereum 2.0. So I'm not anticipating a lot of trouble, right? There will be some changes in transformation, but I think that's expected as the technology evolves.
User Lawful Thoughts asks, what's your take on the team's, or what's your or the team's take on Ethereum 2.0 development and or deployment? Is it essential for your work long term, or could you live on a fork of Ethereum 1.0?
We would really like to see transaction scalability go up. And the number of transactions that Ethereum can handle go up. I'm generally optimistic about the evolution that's taking place. I think it's important to remember, although Ethereum 2.0 doesn't have all of the stuff promised working yet, everything that that is planned for Ethereum 2.0 can be seen in other blockchains at this time, right? They may not be as popular, they may not be as widespread, but I think they prove the principle that all the things that are planned are in fact doable, right? So I think I'm optimistic in that respect. And I feel like there's a lot of really clever people who are already working on that. I do want to take one moment and address what I think is kind of an interesting thing. I often get pinged about people are like, oh, Ethereum is too slow. It's only 15 transactions per second. And this reminds me of people who said 3D printing is too slow. It is true that if you watch a 3D printer print a little part, it seems really slow. It takes like a couple of hours to print something. Whereas if you go to a traditional metal stamping plant, they'll punch out 10,000 of them in about 2 hours. The difference is, if I punch out 10,000 in 2 hours, I'm going to put them in a warehouse somewhere. And if you need that part, you're going to call me and I'm going to FedEx it to you overnight. So in fact, the really slow, agonizing 2 hours the 3D printer took to make that part for you was still 22 hours faster than overnight shipping, next day delivery. So speed is a matter of perspective. And when somebody says 15 transactions per second is too slow, I don't really understand that. Most corporations, their business agreements with each other run on net 30. And I don't mean 30 seconds or 30 minutes. I mean net payment in 30 days. So as long as Ethereum can handle the total volume of transactions, I feel pretty comfortable where that goes. And we're not building for a high-speed trading environment, but I think people get remarkably hung up on transaction scalability. And again, people keep forgetting. I feel like, one of my favorite quotes is, those who don't learn history are condemned to repeat it. My mother was a mainframe software developer. If you had taken one look at the speed of IBM mainframes in the 1960s, you'd be like, this will never work, right? We'll never get to the kind of scale we need. But that's not the benchmark, right? This is an industry where performance improves all the time. And saying 15 transactions per second is too slow or Ethereum can never get there reminds me of this article I read once about how streaming audio was definitely going to destroy the internet.
And here we are. User, DBO Vilataki asks, is EY contributing to the public Ethereum network protocol development and scaling solutions? If so, how? Does EY do so for any other public blockchain networks?
Yes, we are contributing. We've got some EIPs in. We're looking at a couple of other areas. We're probably going to make some contributions back to Socrates, which is the tool, one of the tools that we're using in Nightfall. Ethereum's probably gotten more of our attention than others, but we obviously working quite a bit on Quorum, which is our preferred platform for private blockchains. And then, we support with our audit side of our business, we're going to support we already support Bitcoin, Litecoin, Bitcoin Cash, Ethereum Classic, multiple different token structures. Libra's support is coming. We have lots of EY clients that have committed publicly to use Libra. So we sometimes make contributions to all of those, and we have developers who know about all of those, but we limit our application development for business applications to the Ethereum ecosystem. Audit and tax, however, we serve with our other tool called Blockchain Analyzer, and that is effectively blockchain agnostic. Indications about it.
User Pocket Whalert asks, where do you see EY's role with Ethereum once things like decentralized finance, sharding, and other emerging technologies take off? Will they work mostly with business level improvements or protocol improvements as a whole? We will do a lot of business level improvements. I think we've staked out the one area where we think we can make a meaningful contribution, which is around privacy and security. So I would say, if EY is developing a very specific technical kind of fame in the world of blockchain, it's going to be around zero knowledge proofs, privacy, and security. There are lots of other companies and people who are doing amazing work on scalability, for example, and things like identity. I think we've zeroed in on the idea that enterprise clients in particular care passionately about protecting their information. And so this will be something where we can say with absolute confidence to a client,
your information is going to be secure because we have engineered, built, and really gone through some of the work of this in depth. So I think that's where we're probably going to stake out our big technical contribution.
Wrapping up with some general questions, user what person asks 3 questions. First, how aware are you and the EY team of communities like the Eath Trader and Ethereum subreddit and the overlap of interest between the community and EY? What do you think about it?
So we love to read the comments and the questions. I think they're very insightful. I think I was mentioning to you, I think in many ways we get better questions and more insightful comments from the Eath Trader community on Reddit than we sometimes get from professional journalists. Right? The Eath Trader community has some technical knowledge that most professional journalists don't have. And honestly, they seem to put the dots together about our vision. They put that together. The comments I've read online have often been much more thoughtful and much closer to, I think, the vision that we have than sometimes the analyses that I read in the press.
The first thing I noticed, though, when I entered was the television, the monitor with CoinMarketCap. Isn't it a little bit distracting, in especially 2018 and even this year as well?
Oh, we have a bunch of stuff up here in the lab, so that gets looked at. I don't think anybody pays much attention to that. I will say, again, because of independence rules, everybody at EY, we have to fill out a quarterly independence update. We have to disclose all of our cryptocurrency holdings. We're very careful to avoid anybody here having a conflict of interest. So we have a little screen up with the various cryptocurrency prices, but we don't encourage people to, kind of do any kind of significant. We don't want it to be in a situation where we have a conflict of interest over something like that.
You don't want to see a 20% drop and wonder if somebody's asking for sick leave for whatever reason. Actually, the person asked a follow-up question to this as well. Is there an internal EY policy on owning Ethereum or other cryptocurrencies due to sorry, what was it you mentioned? The conflict of interest concerns. Do you get a sense that a lot of the team or that some team members own crypto? Do you?
I own a tiny amount of crypto, more for research purposes than anything else. We do require it to be disclosed. I don't think it's banned inside of EY anywhere that it's legal. I know that you're allowed to own it in the US. I'm not sure about what happens when enterprise-sponsored cryptocurrencies become available. So far, the key part of the EY policy around conflict of interest is you shouldn't own stocks or assets, for example, in the company that we audit. So if we audit the company, you're not allowed to buy and sell that stock. So I think we could see a policy if there are corporate sponsored cryptocurrencies, they will ultimately be treated like investments. And if we audit those companies, then you would definitely not be allowed, I think, to buy and sell them. We've been updating our policy. It'll probably continue to get updated, but the principle will remain the same, which is that you should not be in a position where you're working in a client situation where there's a conflict of interest between what you might want and what the client would want.
There was another question from Fatfire Throwaway on the competition, but I guess we sufficiently covered that. Let's just wrap up with 2 or 3 more questions. User Bitch Stole My Kodo says, my question has to do with zero knowledge proofs. I think maybe you were kidding in one of the videos where you made a comment referring to how difficult it is to understand exactly what is going on behind the scenes with these proofs. But I can tell you I'm going over the material that is out there and I'm really struggling to understand it all. He asks, how important do you feel it is that users of a technology like this are able to understand how it works? One of the descriptions I hear given for why we like blockchain is because it's trustless. Is it important that the cryptography behind blockchain be trustless too? Can it be trustless if so few people understand how it works? If I had to paraphrase that, to what degree does it matter that your clients, for example, understand what's going on behind the scenes?
Oh, that is an awesome question, because I myself feel a lot of distress. We have passed my level of math understanding a long time ago. And I think this is broadly a bigger picture. It's about all kinds of things in modern society, right? How do we know that global warming is real, for example, right? I'm not a climate scientist. I can't actually tell you for sure if it is, right? At some point, you have to understand at least a reasonable amount of the scientific method, and you have to understand enough about how stuff is researched and tested and peer reviewed that it's doable and that it's workable. I don't understand how zero knowledge proofs work. But I do know that I've hired a bunch of brilliant people. Every time we think we do something, my first question, everybody will tell you, my first question is like, have you had some kind of external review? Have you had somebody else look at this, right? Putting things on public domain, getting them publicly tested. I can't say with absolute certainty that it's the best way to go, but it's the only one I really know how to pursue, which is we've gotten beyond the point where I can personally understand exactly how the math works. But I do think I know enough about how people, organizations, and systems work that if I ask enough clever people and enough independent entities and subject things to enough public scrutiny, I can be confident that the process of vetting and review will produce a solution that is trustworthy.
Last question. User Rhetorical asks, if you could be any blockchain, which one would you be and why?
Oh, I think I'd be Ethereum, just because we spend so much time there.
Just wrapping up, did I forget to ask you anything? Is there something you wish I would have asked you? Is there something you would like to share with whoever is listening to this right now?
Only a thank you. The Ethereum community on Reddit has been amazing. We get clever questions from them. And I've also been really delighted by the civility of the discourse in the Eath trader environment as well. And so I know enterprises don't always say things that people agree with, and they don't always do things that people agree with, but I've been very impressed by the quality of the question and discussion that's gone on in this environment.
Where should people find you or reach out to you? I'm
always on Twitter. I'm not super responsive. I will admit I am absolutely terrible about replying to LinkedIn messages. But usually I do respond to the occasional DMs and messages on Twitter. I'm at P. Brody.
At P. Brody, and I guess that's your username as well, but I guess your Reddit username, but I guess you don't check Reddit too often.
I do check Reddit occasionally, not too much. I checked the YouTube comments about my t-shirt from the SEC meeting, so...
It was wonderful that you could re-upload it in high definition. Well, Paul Brody, thank you very much. Good luck with whatever the future holds, and let's talk again in 10 years or earlier.
Maybe before that.
Or maybe before that, but let's see where this all goes to. And thank you very much for making the time.
Thanks for coming in.